to our weekly celebration of service for April 20th, 2021. I'm your current president, Ashley Wesley. Thank you for being here. Natalie, please show the flag for 15 seconds of respectful silence. We ask that you remain on mute and take this time to personally reflect.
No flag.
Is everyone still there?
We're here.
I apologize. My Zoom just said it crashed unexpectedly and I was in a panic. I apologize for that. Is my screen sharing?
We never saw the
It never
flag, we
shared.
just
I
saw a black
apologize.
screen.
Something's going on. It's blacking it out.
It's Zoom censorship. That's what it is.
Something is truly happening. I apologize.
Let me see a beautiful woman.
I keep hitting share, but it's not showing my screen. I don't know what is. I don't know what is happening.
Well, we hope we all imagined the flag anyway, and
that's right.
Ashley can lead us forward.
Yes, we'll move on and we'll have a graphic next week.
Okay.
Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Charlotte Zitlow, who will be offering our reflection today. Charlotte.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to reflect today on Rotary. And the part of Rotary that I'm going to reflect on is scholarships, because Rotary for me is a lot of things, but one of the things I value very much about Rotary is our international nature, the thing that we're dedicated to international peace, and also we do a great deal for young people. My children were, my daughter was a Rotary Youth Exchange person, which changed her life. She spent a year in Brazil. It changed her life. And we had an Australian woman living with us who I'm still in touch with since 1976. But I'm going to talk about the Rotary Scholarship Program, because it's a huge part of what we do and we don't talk about it often enough. Today, I'm going to go be part of a selection process to get scholarships for high school students. But on your screen now, these are four global grant scholars, as you see, and that's a big deal. Our club has sponsored four global grant scholars. These are huge scholarships. They're $40,000, which is a bunch even today. And the first person that we sent to England was Aubrey Cedar, who was actually working on trying to create peace through art, through performances and music and so forth. Can you hear me? There's feedback. I don't like that. And then we sent Alex Starry, who's from Bloomington, who went to Berlin to study economics and so forth. She got her degree there, and she's still in Berlin because she also learned to know a German as well as German. But she's also working in a not-for-profit organization, an NGO in Germany to working on peace. And right now we have Clarice Cross, whose mother is Japanese, but she's from Brownsburg, and she's in Tokyo. And she'll be speaking tomorrow at the Clarksville Club, but she's doing another project on peace and economics and international understanding. And we've just learned that Cameron Davidson from Salem, Indiana, Little Salem, is going to go to Salamanca in Spain next year and study international relationships and so forth. Salamanca is the oldest university in Europe. So we're very lucky. I don't believe there's another club that has sent four scholars in a row. And I want to say thank you to Jim Bright for making sure that that's happened, because he's been very instrumental in nursing their applications through the multiple hoops that they've had to go through to maintain this. But those are huge scholarships, and that these people will go out and do us proud in the world and work on international peace. But this afternoon as well, Matt Sitzinger is chairing the youth scholarships, where we will be talking to 4 students from local high schools, six students from local high schools, and selecting 4 of those students to give us. We don't have anything like $40,000. I think it's $1,500 right now, but it's still an honor, and it's some money to help them into their school future. So we're going to be talking with 4 scholarships, and this is a group that Byron Bangert spent many years chairing, and Matt Stitzinger has taken it over so that Byron doesn't have to email hundreds of pages of applications anymore. But for me, this is a very fulfilling part of Rotary, and I love it. And I've worked my way. I've really asked to be on these committees, because even though it's a fair amount of work for a few short time, you talk to people, young people, and you find out that their aspirations for a peaceful, good world are out there, and there are a lot of them, and they are smart, and they're hardworking, and they're enterprising, and they're going to help us in making this world a better place. And especially the high school students are so enthusiastic about environmental issues, and the issues of gun control and things like that. These are people who are going to make a difference, and so it's been for me a very wonderful opportunity, and we should all be proud and aware of the work that we do as a Rotary Club to get these young people out into the world, improving it and making it better for our children. So thank you. Thank you all in Rotary for helping support these things. I think they're one of the best things we do, and I'm really lucky to be part of it. So thank you for that too. Okay.
Thank you, Charlotte. And we were reminded, Susie Graham brought to our attention to mention that 3 Ivy Tech students also receive scholarship assistance from us each year.
That's right. That's right.
We fund many initiatives for these people to make a difference in the world. It is so crucial to what we do. So thank you for reminding us about that today, Charlotte.
Yes, I think it's this. And RILA, we also do RILA, the Rotary Youth Leadership.
For students in high school currently. So there's a lot of education support going on, and it's so crucial to these students. So proud to be able to offer that.
Yes.
All right. And Charlotte also mentioned that Clarice Cross will be speaking at Clarksville Rotary tomorrow morning. If anyone wants to wake up bright and early and join them at 7:30 a.m., you're welcome to hop on the Zoom and hear Clarice speak. And I can share that Zoom link with anyone who's interested if you just let me know in the chat or send me a message. We'll forward it along.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Let's move on to introduce any guests, which I don't believe we have any. But let me do a final check here on my screen. I don't think we have any guests with us today. Am I missing anyone? All right. Well, welcome to all of you. So glad that our whole Rotary family can be here and join us every week on Zoom. Soon enough, we will be back in person, and we can't wait for that moment. All right, thanks to our producers, Natalie Blaze, Michael Shermis, and Aaron Davis today for helping us make this run smoothly. And a roundabout reporter this week is Sarah Laughlin, newly back from her vacation. Welcome back, Sarah. We have a few birthdays to celebrate. Joe Darling is today. Peggy Frisbee is April 21st. Mike Baker is April 23rd. Connie Shikalis is April 23rd. And Glenn Steenberger is April 26th. Happy birthday to all of you. And now we have an announcement from our foundation chair, Mike Baker. Take it away, Mike.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm officially calling our annual meeting of the Bloomington Rotary Foundation and our club as of today. It's annually, we sort of give an updated report on our foundation. As you know, our Bloomington Rotary Foundation manages the money from things like the Toast donations we get, the 80-20 donations. I call them bereavement donations, where people pledge so much. If there's a Rotarian who passes, then it's a way of honoring them, and that money is automatically deducted. Those monies go towards scholarships. That's one of the things the foundation does. So to give you just a brief update, our foundation right now has over $93,000 in it. 71,162 of it really is our club's money. The difference between the two is we carry a positive balance money for both the Sunrise and North Club, mostly from the Toast proceeds. And then when they have a need for a matching grant or determine a charitable opportunity to give, then they will withdraw that money. So we're setting at, again, 71,000. And we still are carrying a balance from the last Toast of around 10,000. So we're doing good financially. Also, as part of our annual meeting, I want to thank some board members that are stepping off, and that would be Craig Spence and Joy Harder. Sorry about the phone. It's probably a crank call. I also want to mention that we have an election every year of new officers. So this year, the slate of officers as voted on by our current board would start July 1st, would be President Sarah Laughlin, Vice President Lauren Snyder, Treasurer Kyla Cox-Deckard, Secretary Ashley Wesley. And Natalie will send out a survey, if you will, a survey monkey, and ask for each of you to vote either for that board. And if it's nay, then need to say that. And if you have any recommendations, also send me that. But that's the process that we go through. The board members that will be serving for this new year will be myself, Katie Cruikshank, Alon Barker has agreed to join us, Katie Beck, Jim Capshew, and Gil Souza, who are members from last year. Amy Osajima has agreed. And just a few minutes ago, I worked really hard, but John Vanderzee said he would agree to join us on the board. So we've got a well-versed board. Our job is to manage the money, look over it. Another thing that we discussed, again, our current policy, one of our 80-20 deals that people can sign up for is that if there's a Rotarian who passes during the year, you would automatically pledge that you would donate $20, which goes into our scholarship fund in recognition of that person. We also discussed recognizing being able to use the Rotary Foundation as a way to recognize spouses of Rotarians and actually other family members. And so rather than changing our bylaws to try to reflect that, it'll be up to one of the officers of our foundation, should there be a passing of someone, or any of you feel like there is a someone that you would like to honor through a donation to our foundation, we were going to make sure that it's open for those kinds of donations as well. Let me see. I think that's it. If anyone has any questions about our finances, how the foundation works, or anything else, please email me at any time about it. I want to thank those that have stepped up to serve this coming year. And again, you should be getting something from Natalie to vote on the proposed slate of officers for next year. I think that covers it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And sincere thanks to our newest members who will be joining. So glad when people step up and join one of our leadership positions in Rotary. It's wonderful to see things from that perspective, and I just really appreciate each of you for joining. All right, we have a few announcements. The Solidarity Sleep Out is coming up on April 30th. It's Beacon's annual event to support a friend's place, which is an overnight shelter. And Von Welch, one of our own Rotarians, is participating. So you can hop over to their donation page to give and to support that, and it would be much appreciated. It was good to see Joy Harder, Alon Barker, Sally Gaskell, Owen Johnson, Jim Bright, Raj Hadawi, and Kate Crookshank at the district conference on Saturday. Loved seeing you on the Zoom screen. We had several wonderful speakers. We learned about diversity and inclusion. We learned about the foundation and other things. And it was a really interesting day to spend together, short and sweet and to the point. So I encourage anyone who did not attend to look at that next year, and it'll be in person, I believe. It's always a great time to see things from a district perspective and learn a little bit more about Rotary as an international organization. So thanks to all of you that attended. And I have a note from the MCCSC School of the Board of the School Trustees regarding Dr. Judy DeMuth's retirement. I wanted to pass it along to all of you because in lieu of a retirement farewell reception, because of the current health restrictions that we have, they're planning to give Dr. DeMuth a book of gratitude and a private celebration. And that's where we come in. If you send a note, a card or a letter or an email to MCCSC, and I'll have the address for you in the roundabout, and I'll put it in the chat as well. By Friday, May 7th, it will be included in that booklet of gratitude for Judy, celebrating her many years of service for the school as the superintendent, and it would be much appreciated. So again, that is by Friday, May 7th. I will put the address and email address into the chat, and it'll be in the roundabout as well. All right, time for some happy dollars. Anyone have any happy moments to share? Hal Turner.
Yes, I'm sharing $5 in honor of the residents of Boston who 246 years ago today were put under the British siege of Boston, which lasted for 11 months. But it was one of the pivotal issues of the Revolutionary War. And the British actually left for Nova Scotia after that. And it was a very important aspect. The British blockade was backfired terribly on them because the Americans kept both goods by land and goods by sea from reaching the British troops, which is a big reason that they left. So $5 today in honor of the Bostonians, and to honor them today, I had Boston beans for lunch.
Thanks, Hal. Jim Bright, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, President Ashley. I'd like to pledge $20 in celebration of the 90th birthday of Congressman Lee Hamilton. Congressman Lee Hamilton turns 90 years old today, still super sharp, and we hope to get him in here soon as a speaker. He hasn't spoken to us for 8 or 10 years or so.
Yeah.
Great. Martha Foster.
Yes, I want to just briefly follow up on Charlotte's reflection about what an incredible, wonderful organization this is. And I have 10 happy dollars for the silver linings that have come from the from moving to Zoom for this year, and that is that we can have members of our club like Dr. Raj Hadawi, who are no longer in Bloomington, but can still be part of our club. I'm just very delighted with that. So go Rotary.
Yay. Alon Barker, you're next.
Yeah, so I'm this past weekend was a sort of a bit of a shock to the system when I realized that there was this absolutely terrifying fire in Cape Town. I don't know if some of you were aware of this, but there was a fire that overcame the campus of my alma mater, University of Cape Town, and it just reminded me of, first of all, the heroism and how extraordinary communities are when a tragedy strikes. And Bloomington obviously is one of those communities that I've come to love and to see in times of challenge. And the extraordinary thing about it was the sense of being transported back to a community that I felt part of, but also the recognition that we are already in one big world these days, more and more so. And through technology and communication, we're able to share that. So Rotary, being an international organization, likewise, is part of that world. So I just wanted to say my horizons were sort of expanded once again this weekend.
I will add another $10 in honor of Cape Town's library. I saw the pictures and I was horrified. And I think we saw the same steps that you showed us, that you had been on when you made your protests way back when. Is that not right, Ellen?
That's right. Yeah, it was where it all happened.
Yeah. So anyway, in honor of Cape Town, I hope they saved the old.
Yeah, it's a big tragedy, but I want to quickly say that not all of their holdings were lost. That there were actually 3 buildings that the library is housed in, and so one of the buildings went, but there's still there's a lot of history that's preserved at the University of Cape Town, which is good news.
Raj, did you have a happy dollar to share? You're muted.
I put $25 for the good news following the bad news. My granddaughter, who is sophomore in high school, has been signed up for a course of her study in the wilderness of Colorado mountains. 46 students, and she is one of the half a dozen of them caught coronavirus disease. She was isolated for 10 days. She is recovering well, and I'm very grateful for the news.
Thank you for sharing.
I would also like to contribute five happy dollars in honor of Natalie Blaze's new granddaughter.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks, Becky. I can't wait for you to meet her.
Me too.
All right. Any other happy dollars to share? Okay. Thank you everyone for sharing. And let's not delay any longer. Leslie Green will introduce our speaker for today.
Hi, thank you, Ashley. I'm very excited to introduce you all to Dr. Burns, who is an adjunct professor, associate professor at Northwestern University's Master of Science in Energy and Sustainability program. He's published more than 80 articles and chapters in law, science, and policy journals and books. He is also the executive director and professor of Practice Institute for the Carbon Removal Law and Policy at American University. His current areas of research focus on climate geoengineering, climate loss and damage, and the effectiveness of the European Union's emissions trading system. So I had heard about the Trillion Trees initiative and found it quite fascinating and wanted to know more about it and wanted to find someone who has that expertise, and Google provided. So I've never personally met Dr. Burns, but I'm very excited to have him here with us remotely today to learn more about this interesting initiative.
All right. Thank you very much, Leslie, and thank you for inviting me to speak in front of Rotary. I think Rotary is just a wonderful organization. Not only does it celebrate local community, but as a number of you have emphasized, it celebrates global community, right, and our interdependence with others. And I think the opportunities that are provided in terms of scholarships often are transformative for young people who are exposed to different cultures and different perspectives, and also in many ways project the best of America to others in the world. So I think it's the work you do is wonderful. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about this concept of a trillion trees, and then leave some time for questions. So let me frame the reason that we're even talking about the idea of planting massive amounts of trees, at least when it comes to climate policy. So as you all know, we have this international agreement called the Paris Agreement. And the idea of the Paris Agreement is for countries to make pledges to reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxides, enough that we can hold temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius, it's about 3.7 degrees Fahrenheit, and at least aspire to hold temperatures to below 1.5 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. And these numbers weren't just plucked out of the ether. What climate scientists have told us is that when temperatures increase by more than 2 degrees Celsius, some of the most serious implications of climate change are likely to manifest themselves. Massive losses of biodiversity, massive sea level that could result in flooding of huge swaths of areas, including small island states and low-lying coastal areas in places like Egypt and Bangladesh and the United States. And massive increases in disease, deaths related to heat, and so forth. And so this agreement seeks to ensure that we don't pass those critical temperature thresholds. But what we found in recent years is that the pledges that countries have made to reduce their emissions are not nearly enough to hold temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, much less 1.5 degrees Celsius. Some of the recent studies say that the pledges that have been made to date to reduce emissions put us on track for temperature increases of somewhere between 3 to 3.7 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And temperatures could continue to rise for hundreds of years after that because of the inertia in the system. And these kind of temperature increases could be catastrophic. If temperatures rise 3 degrees Celsius, you could have massive melting of polar ice caps, which could result in huge increases in sea level. You could lose 40 to 50% of the species on Earth. You could have huge economic impacts, right? So clearly, we do not want to pass the 2 degrees Celsius threshold, but when we start talking about 3 and 4 degrees Celsius, it becomes incomprehensible. So as a consequence, in recent years, there's been discussion of another way to respond to climate change to help us to not pass these temperature thresholds. And these are called, in a broad sense, carbon dioxide removal options. So the idea here is not only to reduce our emissions so that we're spewing fewer greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, but to try to remove some of the carbon dioxide that's already resident in the atmosphere. And the idea is that if you remove some of that carbon dioxide, there's less of it to trap the outgoing radiation, right, that's emanated from the sun, hit Earth, and is heading back to space. It reduces the amount of greenhouse gases that can trap that radiation, and it exerts a cooling impact. And most scientists now believe that if we're going to have a chance of avoiding temperature increases of more than 2 degrees Celsius, not only are we going to have to aggressively decarbonize our economy, right? Try to move to renewables as quickly as we can in virtually every sector of our economy and increase energy efficiency. But we're also going to have to deploy these carbon dioxide removal options at a very large scale. Some recent scientific studies have indicated that to hold temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius, not only are we going to have to accelerate our reductions of emissions, but we're going to have to sequester somewhere between 10 to 20 gigatons, that's billion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere every year through the end of the century. And overall, somewhere around 1,000 gigatons. So 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide are going to have to be removed from the atmosphere. So how are we going to do that? Well, there's been various options that have been discussed. I'll talk about some of the other options at the end, but one that has been extensively discussed in recent years is planting trees, right? The idea is that when you plant trees, they take up carbon dioxide, they use them for photosynthesis, and it as a consequence, reduces the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So there have been studies in recent years that have indicated that if we were to plant a massive amount of trees, it could take up substantial amounts of carbon dioxide. One recent study, the one that's cited the most by proponents of this approach, indicated that if we were to increase tree cover on Earth by about 25%, it could remove 25% of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Okay, and that would have a dramatic effect in terms of holding temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius. As a consequence, at the international level, we've had initiatives by the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and others to create what's called the Trillion Trees Initiative, to plant 1 trillion trees that would essentially get us to that 25% forest cover. And US policymakers have also looked at this approach and have sought to support it. Senators Braun and Young in Indiana have co-sponsored a bill with 2 Democratic senators, and how often do you hear that these days, that would seek to provide US support for this International Trillion Trees Initiative. Former President Trump also supported this Trillion Trees Initiative and signed an executive order that sought to provide funding and other support for this effort. Unfortunately, I think there are various issues associated with looking at an initiative of this nature, and that's what I want to discuss. The argument that I made in the editorial that I published in the Indianapolis Tribune recently was that while planting trees can provide some of the solution in terms of carbon removal, it can't by any means be the primary way that we do that. And I just want to outline some of the reasons that I think that's true, and then make a few suggestions of other things that we can do to try to help in terms of climate change more generally, and then carbon removal more specifically. So the first issue with this idea of planting 1 trillion trees is that there's methodological issues. There's problems problems with the studies that have indicated that you could plant 1 trillion trees and that it would reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by a quarter or more. The primary issue with this is that most of those studies ignore the fact that if you're going to plant trees in areas that are already sequestering substantial amounts of carbon, you have to take into account that carbon will be lost when you engage in that tree planting. One recent study said that in the areas in which we're seeking to that we're targeting for tree planting, often grasslands and areas of this nature, store substantial amounts of carbon dioxide already. And so if you plant trees in those areas, you will take up more carbon in the trees, but you'll lose all the carbon in converting those areas. And those studies indicate that that means that we may be overestimating the amount of sequestration of carbon by about 85%, right? So that's a big deal, okay? And again, is not often taken into account in these studies. Another thing that's not taken into account in these studies is something called changes in surface albedo. So when we look at where we would be targeting tree planting, about 25% of all of the trees that would be planted, it's contemplated, would be in northern regions, so-called boreal regions, often areas that are characterized by snow and ice. And one of the reasons that we're targeting areas like that, like the Siberian steppes, for example, is that there's not a lot of land conflicts in those areas, right? So people aren't using those areas for other things. And so people say it's logical to try to plant trees in those areas. The problem is that when you plant trees in those areas, you do take up more carbon dioxide, right? The trees are there, they're taking in CO2 for photosynthesis. But at the same time, you've decreased the reflectivity of the surfaces of that land, right? Ice is highly reflective. It has what we call a high albedo, meaning that when the incoming solar radiation hits Earth, because those areas are so reflective, ice-covered surfaces, it deflects a lot of that radiation back into space. And that exerts a cooling impact, right? By contrast, if you plant trees, trees have low albedo, meaning they absorb a lot more of the incoming solar radiation. And as a consequence, that warms the Earth's surfaces, okay? So some recent studies have said that if you're planting trees in boreal, in northern regions that are covered by ice and snow, because of the increased absorption of incoming solar radiation that doesn't then get reflected back into space, it might offset all of the benefits of planting the trees, or you might even get a net increase in warming, okay? And that's science that has to be taken into account. And a lot of the studies that talk about planting trees assess the benefits of taking in more carbon dioxide, but they don't take into account the decrease in reflectivity of those surfaces. So that's something that's extremely important. Another issue associated with tree planting programs is that a lot of them would displace agricultural areas. And a lot of those areas that are so-called marginal agricultural lands are areas that are being targeted for tree planting. However, if you do that, and you still need the same amount of agricultural production, which there's no reason to believe you don't, it means that that agricultural production moves to other areas. And so, of course, you have to clear away forests or grasslands or other areas for more agricultural crop production. And when you do that, again, you release carbon dioxide. And many of the studies, again, don't take into account what happens with that. And that's what we call leakage, right? Simply that the carbon dioxide releases are leaking to other areas because of the actions that we've taken. A second issue associated with planting trees is the issue of permanence. If you plant trees, are you getting sequestration of carbon for a long time, right? For this to matter, you need sequestration of carbon for 30, 40, 50 years or more, okay? The problem is that recent studies have indicated that at least 50% of trees are in areas that are prone to what we call stand replacing disturbances. What are some of these things that might kill trees? Well, one of them is climate change, right? As the climate gets warmer, we've seen a proliferation of forest fires, right? We've seen this in California, right, at a massive scale in recent years. In Australia, in those areas, for example, if you take California and Oregon, the forest fires in California made trees what we call a net source of carbon, right? More carbon was being released than was being taken in by those trees as they were burnt. And as temperatures continue to increase, the studies indicate that there's going to be increases in forest fires. And so the question is, can we rely on planting trees as a long-term source of storage of carbon? The other thing that's happening because of climate change is the proliferation of pests that can kill trees, such as bark beetles. And we've seen in many parts of the world that where we've planted trees, bark beetle proliferation associated with the increasing temperatures are killing huge stands of trees. And so again, tree planting may not create the kind of permanent sequestration of carbon that's going to be necessary if we're going to hold temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius. Planting trees can also have serious environmental and social justice implications in some areas. For example, about 50% of where we're looking to plant trees are savannas and prairie grasslands. And what we're usually looking to do when we plant trees is plant monocultural trees, like eucalyptus trees, that are fast growing, right? Because we're trying to suck up a lot of carbon, and we don't want to make the tree stands very complicated because that makes management more complicated, right? So what we're looking to do is take out a lot of savannas, prairie grasslands, including in areas like Africa, to plant these monocultural sort of tree stands. The problem with that is that savannas and grasslands hold huge amounts of biodiversity, and a lot of that biodiversity would be lost. And monocultural tree stands are not, by definition, very good for biodiversity. And this could further undercut the biodiversity in some of the bio hotspots of the world, again, such as Southern Africa. We also have seen in those areas that tree planting can take huge amounts of water in areas that are already water poor and are going to need more water in the future as populations proliferate. We also worry about land grabs. If we need huge amounts of areas, if you're going to increase the area of trees by 25%, you're talking about a land area that's equivalent to half the size of the African continent, okay? And one of the things that we're worried about is that people who, especially indigenous peoples that rely on certain areas for their livelihoods, will be expelled in those areas as people try to plant trees and earn credits so they can sell on the voluntary carbon markets. For example, companies like Microsoft and Apple and United are now buying tree credits, right? And there's going to be people that are going to make money by planting those trees, and some of them may do it by simply displacing people from those areas. And we've seen some of this happen in the past, and we're worried about it in this context also. So when we look at all of these factors and we start to ask ourselves, how much carbon can we sequester sustainably and in a way that doesn't create these kind of social justice threats, the numbers go down a lot. Recent studies have said that at the most, we can probably sequester somewhere between 1 to 2 gigatons or billion tons of carbon a year with the amount of trees that we can plant sustainably, okay? To put that in perspective, that would decrease temperatures by about 0.25 to 0.45 degrees Celsius, right? So it's something, right? And it's definitely should be part of the mix that we're looking at, but it can't be the entire story, right? If we know now as a society that we need to sequester 10 to 20 billion tons a year, and trees can only give us 1 to 2, then there's lots of other things that we need to do, right? And so that's the last thing I want to talk about very briefly. What else should we be doing? Well, the first thing, obviously, before we get to carbon removal, is we need to increase our decarbonization of the economy and do it far more aggressively. There's there's plenty of things that that could be done that we simply aren't doing, right? We can accelerate electrification of parts of the economy. We can substantially increase fuel efficiency, and that has to be job one, even before we look at carbon removal. In the context of carbon removal, when it comes to trees, there's a couple of things that need to guide any tree planting initiative, including the Trillion Trees bill that the senators from Indiana have introduced. One is that tree planting initiatives have to not target savannas and prairie grasslands, right? We have to ensure that certain areas are preserved because of the other ecosystem benefits that they provide. We also shouldn't be targeting boreal regions, again, because the increased absorption of solar radiation is going to take out most of the benefits, and we just have to acknowledge that. Tree planting programs also should focus on the planting of mixed native species, right? We should try to preserve biodiversity in areas and not simply develop monocultural plantations that denude areas of biodiversity and often take a lot more water. That can be a more expensive proposition than simply going in and planting a bunch of eucalyptus. But from a standpoint of the ecosystems and justice, it makes sense. When we think about tree planting, we should be thinking creatively about the role of agroforestry. Agroforestry is planting trees in agricultural areas, planting trees between crops, for example, or in grazing lands. In those areas, it can not only not increase the amount of land that has to be utilized, but it can provide co-benefits for farmers because it can make their economics more resilient, right? They can rely on fruit and wood from those products to help them, especially in times where they might face drought in terms of their crops. And so it can provide co-benefits at the same time that it sequesters carbon and it doesn't require us to use more land. Part of any bill, such as Senator Bruns and Young, should include increased funding for agroforestry research and development. And then finally, we need robust funding for other carbon removal approaches. There are some that are more technological in nature. There's something called direct air capture, which essentially uses large filters to bring in ambient air, separate out the carbon dioxide, and then seek to store the carbon dioxide underground or use the carbon dioxide for other products. A lot of times we talk about trees because it feels like a more natural sort of solution, right? We become squeamish when we're talking about using metal and concrete and things like that to create solutions. But the thing that needs to be emphasized is that natural is not always natural, right? Tree planting at the kind of scales we're talking about is ultimately likely to more fundamentally undermine nature than some of these technological approaches. So we need to be looking at things like direct air capture. We need to be looking at things such as enhanced mineral weathering, the idea that we grind up minerals that take up carbon dioxide. They're rich in silicate and manganese. And by grinding those up, we accelerate the natural process that takes up carbon dioxide. And in some cases, we may be able to utilize minerals and apply them to crops in ways that provide co-benefits for farmers in terms of crop yields. And so we need a robust research program in the United States and globally to look at the potential benefits of those approaches. And so with that, I'll conclude and simply say that trillion trees sounds like a good idea, but it really needs to be scrutinized in terms of science and justice in a way that it helps us to address climate change while not exacerbating some of the other kinds of problems that I talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing some thoughts on the Trillion Trees Initiative. A lot to think about there. We have time for a few moments of questions, but will you be able to stay with us a few minutes after we close
You
the
bet.
program? Okay.
Absolutely.
Who has the first question? Jim Sims?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Good, good. Thank you, Mr. Burns, for the presentation. I do a little bit of work with local political and community work. And with your talk today on planting trees, but then there's one thing that you said that captured my attention. That's not the entire story. There are other elements, electrification, I think you mentioned, robust funding, more efficient usages of fuel. I'm assuming that's fossil fuel. But one of the things that concerns me is the global aspect, or national, or just much larger aspect. And if you have a community that is doing or trying to do the best they can with climate change issues, but you're not in total collaboration with that region or the area around you, how effective are those individual? I mean, I know it'll help some, but overall, how effective is that if there's not a broader agreement or reach on attaining that goal?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we clearly need to be doing this nationally. A lot of times, if a state is trying to do the right thing, let's say a state wants to tell power plants in its area that they have to reduce their emissions, the threat to the state is that the power plant or an industry will move elsewhere, right? There'll always be a state that'll say, just come on in and do, just party like it's 1999, right? And that's a threat, right? And so you need a national approach that stops that from happening. Plus, if you have a factory that's polluting and it simply moves to another state, right? You're not. The greenhouse gases are still going to end up in Indiana ultimately, right? And the impacts are going to happen, right? So you need the national approach. One of the reasons, though, that the local approach I think is important is beyond the fact that, as you said, Jim, it makes some difference, right? And if you aggregate, right, a billion Bloomingtons, it can make a difference, right? But the other thing that it does is it helps to convince people that we need to address this issue, and that can translate into people communicating that to policymakers, right? And that really matters. What political scientists tell you is if you look at the average politician, they don't care what you think about an issue unless it's an issue that you will either vote them in office for or out of office for, right? The fancy term for it is issue saliency, right? And we know what some of those issues are, right? Guns, right? The economy, abortion, right? These are hot button sort of issues that politicians take attention to because they know that their careers live and die by it, right? Most of the time, they just kind of chuckle about climate change because they know that people aren't going to vote for them or against them on that basis. But if people start working at the local level on climate change issues, I think they put more skin in the game. And they start to communicate that it's more important to politicians. Politicians take note, and you'll start seeing national legislation, right? And we need it, and we need bipartisan sort of efforts, right? One of the things I want to emphasize is I applaud the fact that your two senators, who are Republicans from a conservative state, are trying to work, acknowledging that climate change is happening, and are working on a solution, right? It may not be all of it, but it's a good thing. So the more we can tell politicians, compliment them for doing that, and punishing them when they don't do that, the more likely we'll get national efforts on top of the local efforts.
Thank you.
We need to close our program briefly, but as we said, we will return right after with some more questions for Will. Okay, in honor of your presentation today, we will be giving a donation to Monroe County United Ministries. So thank you for being here. And Next week, April 27th on Zoom, we'll hear from Marjorie Hershey with the filibuster and the Biden agenda. What's happening now? So tune in. And Natalie, let's have our four-way test so we can close our meeting together.
If you can.
If we can. I think we might know the four-way test without having to see the graphic. Do we want to test it?
Let's test it.
Okay. Of the things we say and do.
Say or do.
First,
Is it the truth?
Second,
Second,
fair to all concerned.
fair to all concerned.
Third,
will it
Will it promote
goodwill, better
friendships?
friendships.
fourth,
is it
Beneficial to all concerned.
Concerned.
And
And
fifth,
fifth, is it fun?
hey, look at that. We remembered without having to see the